O culto do corpo bonito domina a cultura, promovido pela mídia. Corpo esbelto e magro na mulher, seios e nádegas protuberantes, nada flácido, pouca gordura, sem celulite, sem rugas. Quem não é assim, diz a mensagem, que se torne assim, via remédios, cremes ou cirurgia plástica. Homens não escapam do culto, com a pressão por barriga lisa e peitos rígidos, músculos torneados, cabelos fartos, rosto magro. Se a natureza e os exercícios não contribuírem, esteroides, vitaminas, produtos dietéticos ou bisturi são convocados. O modelo ideal cobra um preço, que extravasa nos consultórios de médicos e psicoterapeutas, onde a vergonha do corpo transforma-se em insegurança e depressão. Abala crianças, adolescentes e adultos que não preenchem os requisitos. Esse é o tema de estudo e prática da psicanalista britânica Susie Orbach. Ela produziu vários trabalhos sobre o assunto de nossa conversa, inclusive o livro que acaba de lançar na Europa e nos Estados Unidos, Bodies, ou Corpos.
Your book goes beyond the usual description of the body beautiful myth that we're familiar with. You talk about the fact that the bodies, in a way, speak to us. What do you mean, bodies speak to us?
Well, I think I mean a lot of different things. I think we speak through our body, how we wish to be seen, how we wish to be regarded, what we want to say about ourselves. Our bodies become a kind of sign, about an announcement card, if you like, about who we are, who we perceive ourselves to be, and our position in the world.
You know, Freudian psychoanalysis says that the mind commands the body, but you seem to want to reverse that.
I think Freud was very interesting in helping us to understand the ways in which the mind could exert an extraordinary power on the body, creating strange symptoms like an imagined pregnancy or a paralyzed limb or speaking in a foreign tongue, and that one couldn't really understand what was going on unless you tried to listen to what the body was saying. But what I think we've been seeing increasingly in psychoanalytic patients or in people that seek therapy is that their bodies now have become a means to destabilize their mind. Their body preoccupations are such great concern to them that they develop emotional insecurities which are, if you like, provoked by bodily issues.
Well, it is true that modern society promotes the body beautiful, but aren't all societies in that way as well? Because if you think the Amazon Indians paint their bodies, in Cambodia they stretch their necks, in Japan they squeeze the feet of the women. So aren't they all trying to fit into a pattern of beauty?
I think every culture has always marked its people and decided on standards of beauty. What's different today is that where in Japan or the Amazon or Cambodia you were marked by your tribe, we now have a global notion of beauty which is essentially Western, which is exported all over the world, and which one is invited to enter into, not just at the age of adolescence or young womanhood or young manhood, but really from the age of 4, 5, 6 to the old age home. And part of engaging in modern culture is to appropriate and to mimic the bodies of the West. So you will see Chinese women who have money having a 10-centimeter rod inserted in their legs to give them height, men too. You will see Fijian girls resculpting their bodies because they come really quite voluptuous and fleshy, being over the toilet bowl with bulimia, trying to represent a different trying to find a different kind of body. So it isn't that we didn't mark bodies, it's just that we didn't have a uniformity. And what's happening at this moment is we're kind of losing body variety, very much like we're losing the variety of languages that exist in the world.
Part of that standard that's coming from the West, for instance, fights obesity. People shouldn't be, both men and women, shouldn't be fat. But isn't that focus on not being obese also a healthy promotion? In other words, don't get fat because you're going to get sick.
Well, it might be a healthy position if the obesity stats were accurate or useful. But I don't exactly know where obesity starts. According to the arguments being made in the world at the moment, 50% of us are going to be obese. Now, neither you or I are obese. I mean, how the hell do we get this 50% figure? You get this 50% figure by making people who are just marginally bigger in an overweight or an obese category. So you get a whole sense of obesity being the construction of a disease and a size, which isn't really accurate. And it's not accurate because, in fact, the healthiest weight is something that would be considered in the overweight category. But that is not promulgated. What's promulgated is that obesity is a disease entity, and it's something that we really have to watch out for.
So are our bodies then being commercialized?
Absolutely. I think if you can render people insecure about their body states, you can make an awful lot of money. I mean, the diet industry is, certainly in the United States, is the spend on diet is almost as big as the US government spend on education, right? That dieting is one of those industries that is phenomenally successful because it's an industry built on failure. It doesn't work, so it's a perfect industry, really.
Hasn't there been a behavior like this always, in a sense, or is it just only recently that we've got obsessive with the body beautiful?
Oh, I don't think we've always been obsessed, and certainly not cross-class, cross-age group, cross-occupation. No, I think there was a brief moment in history when a woman needed to look a certain kind of way in order to catch that thing called a man that seemed to be, I don't know why he was considered such a scarce commodity, and there were always movie stars, if you're thinking about the last 100 years, or if you're thinking about Western or Eastern art, there's always the enunciation or the portrayal of a form of beauty. But that wasn't for everybody. That was really for the haute bourgeoisie for a very short period of time. It certainly wasn't, there was not the democratization of beauty, which you have today, where beauty is not only a category you can be, but it's a kind of imperative in order to live your life.
You mentioned in your book again that in your practice as a psychoanalyst, you see a lot of variety of ailments such as anorexia, bulimia, self-mutilation, fear of aging, compulsive exercising, diet, all of these things as attempts by individuals to get rid of body shame. What is body shame?
Well, I think what I'm trying to argue is that there's so much distress around the body, a feeling that it isn't my body, it doesn't feel right, this is not how I want to be, I'm spewing out all over, I'm ugly, I'm too fat, I'm too this, I'm too that. That a lot of these symptoms could be seen as attempts to get a body that feels okay. So instead of seeing them as a result of a psychological problem, I tend to see them much more as the attempt on the individual to find a way to pay some kind of attention to their body and to find some soothing and some resting place, which unfortunately they don't.
Do they actually come to you saying that they have a problem with their bodies, or they're usually discussing something else and you find out that in fact that's what's behind it?
I think there's two different categories. Because I've written widely on the body, there are people who will come to me explicitly with body problems. But I will always limit in my practice the number of people with severe body problems because I'm a generalist, right? So if I leave aside those people, what strikes me and what shocks me and what I felt was important to write about is that people take for granted that they might be discussing the breakup of a relationship or struggles with their work or their children, doesn't really matter, or their parents, and that they will inevitably say in the course of therapy, quite early on, expecting assent on my part, that of course, if only their body were different, everything would be all right, or if only they lost 5 pounds, or if so the story of the body is woven in to people's experience of the rest of their lives. as though it is an object that they need to fix, perfect, and could carry for them solutions for all sorts of other things. So it's not me who brings it up. I don't have to bring it up. In fact, I'd rather not bring it up.
And obviously, we're not only talking about women or girls.
Sadly not. I mean, I think the market really has become so successful for the style industries that they've so easily and brilliantly deconstructed women's relationship to their bodies that they're offering men the same rotten solutions. I think we started to see this about 20 years ago, when the patterns of employment 25 years ago were changing, and there was no longer a job for life, and masculinity was being questioned as to what it was. And if you looked at men's magazines from that time, they were feminized. They certainly were. It was the beginning of the six-pack revolution and the beginning of an ideal.
Six-pack meaning the flat stomach.
Beginning of the ideal of particular body types, as opposed to men having gravitas, whatever size they were.
So, you know, men are becoming victims of this standard as well.
Oh, absolutely, and the plastic surgery figures bear that out. I mean, men will have pec implants, they'll have cheek implants, they'll have certainly hair implants.
There's been along the lines of what you're saying, a recent research in America showed that young boys were influenced by not just magazines, video games, because the images of men in video games are muscular and strong.
But that makes perfect sense, right? Because the visual image, if it's crossing your eyes as intensely as it does when you're in front of a screen, it reconstructs your own relationship to self. So you become critical of yourself, and pretty soon you become desirous of the thing that you see, and you wish to inhabit that kind of a body. And you'll see a lot of men in the gym who would have a body image problem by another name, except it has a kind of respectable thing, which is that they're in the gym working out. They're as psychically troubled, if you like, as the people you want to put in the obesity stats. It just doesn't look that way because they look like they're doing good.
Just as much body shame, as you call it. Yeah. You mentioned plastic surgery, which reminds me of the story you described that when you went to Sao Paulo once. You felt a little bit odd because people were telling you, how come you haven't had plastic surgery? You haven't been renovated as such.
Yeah, I felt it. I got the sort of whiff of it there. I got it much more in New York recently, where I realized it's almost illegal to be as old as I am and not to have worked on myself, and to discover from a New York Times journalist that she didn't know the ages of anybody who worked in her office because they all looked an indeterminate age. Everybody had been worked on. I think the word worked on is also very interesting, as though it is a labor, as though your body is a labor that you have to work on. And that it isn't really okay to appear to have the vibrancy or aging or energy or anything to do with the fact that you're actually kind of, I'm post-reproductive, I'm a woman of a certain age.
The wrinkles that show your wisdom.
Well, I don't know if they show my wisdom, they show my living.
Would you also add to that the cult of the celebrity culture that promotes the beautiful people that show up in glossy magazines? They're absolutely perfect. Of course, some of them have been manipulated photographically, but the culture of celebrity.
The culture of celebrity plays a really interesting role, because they not only do we know that every picture in Vogue, every single picture has gone back and forth between the art director and the photographer 200 times. I found that absolutely an extraordinary statistic. I mean, phenomenal.
To improve on it.
Yeah, 200. It's a 200-time go. It isn't just improve once. But that celebrity has also come to stand in for the way we have public conversation about important issues. We now have celebrity on the one hand in football, and I don't know if it's very different in Brazil, but we're in the middle of an economic crisis, but we choose to use celebrity culture to discuss things rather than...
To discuss the economic crisis?
Well, not to discuss the economic crisis, I think.
When the paparazzi catches one of these after a rough night, halfway drunk, walking down the streets, and you can see all the wrinkles, you can see the mascara down, or if they catch them at the beach, and you can see all the extra fats that the photographs and the glossy magazine hide. That's what the public goes for, as much as they go for the glossy.
They go for both. They go for... Because I think the magazine is no longer a site of imagination. You see, magazines, I think, used to be places for fun, but they're so deadly. They're so poisonous now that you need the antidote of, this is what they're really like. This is what these people really look like. Of course, they don't look like either of those things. They look like somewhere in between.
You know, many people think that looking at the media, both magazines and TV, films and all that, and they think they're too bright to be manipulated by that. But in fact, your experience shows that's not the case.
Well, I'm certainly not too bright to be manipulated. I mean, I will look at those pictures and they will have exactly the same impact on me. I will think, oh, gosh, that's weird, and I see a new kind of fashion. I don't really go for that. I'll find it unpleasant, maybe even repulsive. And then I'll look out for those pictures again and again, and then pretty soon I'll think, I think I need updating. You know, there's something wrong with my trousers or the shape of my skirt.
You catch yourself sometimes and say, wait, I'm being manipulated here.
And then I think, I see, this is how it works. It's a very complex process by which you have a relationship with the images that are around you. You don't want to be the passive victim of them. You want to be an active agent in relation to them. So you want to partake in that. You want to include yourself within that.
When I think about that situation in the context of Brazil, for instance, one very influential cultural factor in Brazil are the soap operas on television, where you usually see very attractive men and women, young and perfect shape, the beautiful people. I keep wondering what impact that would have on people who cannot fulfill those standards.
Well, I'm sure Brazil, being one of the world capitals for cosmetic surgery, it must fuel that industry very, very well. Isn't it true, unless I've got this wrong, that Brazil used to really like the bum, but now they've kind of Disneyfied and really like the breast as well, and they probably will go for facial reconstructions that mimic the pictures of the people on your soap operas. And that will be considered perfectly okay. I mean, in Argentina, for example, in your health insurance plan, you have the right to a plastic surgery procedure every other year. This is in a health plan. So
strong lobby probably got that approved.
We now have changed the categories of what constitutes health.
Moving on to sex, or rather a discussion of sex.
Okay.
Your book suggests that a lot of sexual insecurities that people have and lead them to consult psychotherapists like yourself are actually insecure about their bodies.
Well, sex does have something to do with the body, right? I mean,
hopefully.
That is the power of it. And it isn't, but sex has now become such a kind of visual category for girls. And I'll talk more for girls because I think it's more troubling. I mean, young women have gone from not being allowed to be sexual to living in a highly over-sexualized culture where, in a way, they don't know what the erotic is. And so they only know it by looking at pictures of how you're supposed to be when you're being sexual, right? So often, they don't have much sense of the power of their own sexuality for themselves. I mean, even in my daughter's school, perfectly lovely school, they were taught how to put condoms on. They weren't taught anything about their own sexual desire. They weren't taught about clitorises. They were taught about how you protect yourself. So sexuality becomes this kind of, on the one hand, sexual hygiene, and on the other hand, super images, but not really about connection and the development of an erotic interplay. And I think it becomes very difficult for young women to express themselves sexually if they don't think about how they appear when they're being sexual.
But how do you relate that to their body?
Because I think they think they need to represent sexuality in a very, the way you look, if you watch movies of how people are having their orgasms or how their hair is going or where their breasts are lying, or in other words, it's become, rather than an inside experience, it's become a physical, visual representation.
If we take this body unhappiness to an extreme, you may get cases of self-mutilation, an extreme form of body shame, of body unhappiness. You know, traditional Freudians would say that that's an unresolved sexual dilemma that leads people to do that, to But do you think it goes beyond that?
Well, I think it was a very useful explanation for the end of the 19th century, and it may be true for people today. But we're now seeing such a very wide variety of what for Freudians would be perversions that I don't think it's a sufficiently elaborated response to say it's all about a sexual conflict, because it doesn't get you anywhere, all right? I mean, if you end up at the sexual conflict, then where do you go? You need to undo the embroidery a bit more and understand what does sex mean for that person. I mean, in Bodies, I talk about somebody who has a wish to do away with their legs. Now, I find that a very extraordinary idea.
Wait, cut off the legs.
Cut off the legs. Now, his experience was that he wasn't in the right body, that his legs were surplus to requirement. They were protuberances. He did not want them. They encumbered him. They weren't right for him. He wanted his body to end here. Now, to say that he wanted to do away with legs and what those represented were penises, I think would not really be very useful. I think it's much more complex than that. The question is, why did his body not reside through the whole of him? Why did he not feel that there was a body integrity? Which then, for me, raises questions of how do you get a body integrity and how can it get focused in very strange ways?
You conclude your book with a plea for people to rethink their bodies so they can accept their bodies and enjoy it. Obviously, that sounds fine, but how do you do it?
Well, I think there's a lot of joy to be had in our bodies, actually. And I think that as long as we see our bodies from the outside, which is a lot of how women and increasingly boys and men are encouraged to see them, it's very hard to enjoy them. But even from the outside, if women were to look at pictures of themselves from a few years before, they often find them very beautiful. They think, God, I look great then. And then they remember that they didn't feel good about themselves then. And the space or the dissonance between those two experiences can allow them to have a kind of curiosity about the mental processes by which they denigrate themselves. And it's a very good opening point to think, wait, am I doing to myself now what I did to myself 5 years ago? Do I want to be doing that 5 years from now? Can I dare to have some pleasure in my body? Can I dare to experience myself as lovely as I am? So that might be one starting point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.